Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Richard Branson. Losing My Virginity, the Autobiography. Chapter 1. 31 Changes. 2006. Many things came together in the summer of 2006 to make me focus on the two linked issues of global warming and rising fuel prices. I had first seen warning lights when the figures showed me that Virgin's fuel bill was rising by $500 million a year. As early as my teens, perhaps because of the influence of one of my relatives, Peter Scott, who founded the World Wildlife Fund, I was interested in the environment. I was drawn to the Gaia theory, a hypothesis formulated by James Lovelock almost 40 years ago, which states that the Earth is a living entity, like a single cell, and like a single cell, everything it needs for its existence is contained within it. Professor Lovelock believes that the planet can heal itself if damaged, but even with Gaia, there is a point of no return, beyond which the damage could be irreversible. We at Virgin knew what dangers came from wasting resources and carelessly burning fossil fuels, but, for many reasons, even among the greenest of the greens, there was no real sense of urgency. I'm afraid that it wasn't until it began to affect me personally that I sat up and took more notice. I first got interested in looking for alternative fuels in the 1990s, when I became more aware that oil was a finite resource. Britain's own North Sea oil was running out, and most of the rest of the world's supplies were in the hands of OPEC, in a very unstable Middle East, which could make oil both vulnerable and expensive. The war between Iraq and Iran in the 1980s raised the price of oil from an average of $16 a barrel to a spike of almost $70. When Saddam went after the Kuwaiti oil fields in 1990, it confirmed oil's vulnerability to war. As someone who is heavily involved in the transport business, I needed to be aware of the cost and availability of oil, and I looked into the alternatives. Virgin used over 700 million gallons of jet fuel between the 4 airlines, and large amounts of diesel in Virgin trains. In 1997, when we were investing in a new fleet of trains, I asked the manufacturer, Alstom, to ensure they were fuel efficient. As a result, our Pendolino trains are the only ones in Europe that put 20% of electricity back into the grid every time the train breaks. And our Voyager diesel-electric trains are being converted to a biofuel blend of rape and soya. Then, after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when the U.S. drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico and the huge refineries along the Gulf Coast were damaged or destroyed, the price of refined fuels in the U.S. went through the roof. With a major capacity shortage, I started to look into the potential of investing in our own oil refineries, and in fact, issued a press release to announce that we were building one, hopefully to bring the price down. Ted Turner is an interesting blend of capitalist, environmentalist, and philanthropist, who is as well known for founding the CNN News Channel as he is for owning the Atlanta Braves, and for being an Olympic yachtsman and winning the America's Cup. I had last met him at the Time Global Health Summit a few months earlier, alongside Bill Gates, Madeleine Albright, Paul Wolfowitz, Bono, and others. And after I announced my intention to build an oil refinery, Ted rang me and said, "Richard, have you thought of the alternatives?" "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Why not build a refinery for clean rather than dirty fuel? Come and meet my people. They will convince you that there is another way." Ted invited me to Washington to lunch with some members of the United Nations Foundation, a think tank he had started up with a hefty donation of $1 billion to look into environmental issues and push biofuels in the U.S. Around the lunch table with Ted were Senator Tim Wirth, the UNF's president, John Podesta, Bill Clinton's former chief of staff, Boyden Gray, George Bush's legal counsel, and Reed Dechon, head of the Energy Future Coalition. The subject almost immediately turned to biofuels. I already knew a fair bit about fuels in general, but wasn't yet as knowledgeable about biofuels as this group was. While they talked, I made my usual cryptic notes in the notebook I always carry, and by the end of the meal, I decided that they were right. Instead of investing in conventional forms of refining, the more sensible thing for Virgin to do would be to invest considerable sums in alternative fuels. I am lucky. Once I make up my mind, I can generally do something about it. I joined the steering board of Ted's Energy Future Coalition and went back to my team at Virgin and asked them to look into plant-based ethanol. The result was that I became hooked on the potential of biofuels as an environmental necessity and as one way forward to loosen the world's dependency on oil fields. Both environmentally and economically, it made perfect sense that individual countries should grow their own fuel and use it at point of origin without transporting it halfway around the world, thus saving even more on financial costs and CO2 emissions. I formed Virgin Fuels in early 2006 and began an investment program in research and development of biofuel. Our first investment was to back a California firm, Cillian, which makes bioethanol from corn. We started to build biofuel refineries in both the American West and Tennessee, at both the point of origin and of use, and then moved into Brazil. The next stage will be to expand into the U.S. East Coast and elsewhere in Europe. I wasn't being entirely altruistic. Alternative fuels should be a good business move. Investing in them puts pressure on fossil fuel prices and acts as a hedge for our airline and train companies. If the price of oil remains high, we can make very decent returns on both our research and development and our investment in the cost of building refineries. It also makes perfect sense over the next 5 or 6 years to replace some or all of our conventional fuel with our own fuels. In the early summer of 2006, Virgin Fuels had already made its first investments, but I still wasn't fully aware of the urgency of global warming. But nothing wakes one up more to the issues at hand than the former Vice President of the United States coming all the way to your home in Holland Park, London, to give a personal lecture on global warming. When the film An Inconvenient Truth came out some months later, I realized that he'd test run it on me at my home that day. We sat down at the low table in the sitting room, and Joan brought in tea and sandwiches. Al perched on a corner of the table and pulled out his PC and switched it on. I sat in a big armchair, with Will Whitehorn leaning over behind me and Steve Howard of the Climate Group seated on the other side, and we all looked at the screen. It was quite an experience having a brilliant communicator, like Gore, give me a personal PowerPoint presentation. Not only was it one of the best presentations I have ever seen in my life, but it was profoundly disturbing to become aware that we are potentially facing the end of the world as we know it. The impact on humanity and the natural world could be so great that we have no choice but to do something drastic, first to stop it, and then turn it around. During our intense discussion, Steve Howard said that we need to make people confident that this is a problem that can be solved. Some people think dealing with climate change could destroy the economy and is therefore an insoluble problem, but there is a lot we can do. We really have no choice in the matter. We have to do it. Al agreed. Looking directly at me, he said, "Richard, you're known the world over. You could help to lead the way with me in dealing with climate change. Without the politicians, we need business leaders to take the lead." Al Gore's lecture was a polemic, but it had enough good science around it to work really well. It was the first time I'd been presented with the full enormity of the effects of climate change. I saw at once that if we don't do something fast to fix carbon emissions, in a very short space of time most of the Earth will be uninhabitable, and the planet's population will plummet. Most animals and plants will become extinct and life will be wretched. I'm just about to launch a new air route to Dubai, I said. Usually I like doing that kind of thing, but now I could see the paradox of it. We want a connected world, we want to be able to fly, but we must also beat climate change. How much time do we have? I asked. Al replied, scientists say that we may have as little as 10 years before we cross a tipping point, beyond which it will be too late. We have to make a massive and determined start. If we do, it is possible to start leveling out CO2 within the next 5 years. Part of it is evolution. Our brains are good at perceiving danger in the form of fangs and claws and spiders and fire, but we find it hard to deal with dangers that can't be seen until it's too late, like the world heating up. Most of it is happening right now at the poles, where very few people see it, and so couldn't care less. Al was very persuasive and remained good-humored, despite his argument with Will as to when Lovelock had first written Gaia theory. Sometimes it's interesting to be in a room with two people who both think they're right. After Al Gore left, Will and I had a long discussion about the way in which Virgin could take a lead in dealing with global warming. Obviously, with over 50,000 people working for us, and their livelihoods at stake, I didn't want to make any drastic changes that would mean we would run unprofitably, but I saw a way forwards in which we could act responsibly by making small changes, such as using long-lasting light bulbs and becoming paper-free, as well as major changes, like switching to biofuels as and when possible. We coined the phrase Gaia Capitalism to describe this. The concept of Gaia Capitalism is all about solutions. We wanted to take an apparent contradiction and show that it worked and made real sense. We were able to do this efficiently because Virgin is like a massive ecosystem. The parts are separately run and managed, and even have their own shareholders, but there's always the linkages between them. 3 months later, Bill Clinton rang me to see if I would make a pledge to his global initiative. That night in the bath I had an idea. Al Gore had said he needed leadership from me. What if I pledged 100% of all profits the Virgin Group made from our airline and train companies, and invested them in developing alternative fuels? That could make a big difference, and perhaps get other business leaders on board too. As a result of my conversation with Bill Clinton, 2 months later I flew to New York to attend the Clinton Global Initiative. On September 21st, the second day of the conference, I joined Bill Clinton and Al Gore to personally pledge $3 billion to develop clean fuels. As I was about to sign the commitment document, I looked up at President Bill Clinton and, with just the right degree of dramatic pause, pen poised, said, "That's an awful lot of knots." It was a firm commitment, intended not just to move the Virgin Group forwards, but to inspire others. The idea is to pinpoint our transport companies to fund this investment, but if it's not met from that direction, the money will come out of our other existing businesses as well. We will do it whatever it takes. One of the things I stressed was that this wasn't philanthropy or charity. Our entire Gaia project is based on sound commercial sense. I didn't want the media to give the impression that this was some kind of donation to environmental causes, but they did, painting me as some kind of universal benefactor. Charitable donations do have their place, but to me it seems far more sustainable to invest seed money in order to generate money for the future, so that the ball continues to roll, and we can have a better chance of competing with the oil and coal companies. After my public announcement, which within moments was beamed around the world, Steve Howard said, "Richard, we work with lots of different organizations, but the pace of change at Virgin is without parallel. It is really impressive to see the Virgin machine unleash itself." Someone asked me what I felt about soaring oil prices. To the disappointment of my airline's executives, I said, "I think that soaring oil prices are the best thing that has happened to this world. It forces governments and big business to find new ways of reducing their dependency on oil. We needed something like this to happen to bring a halt to an almost suicidal dependency on fossil fuel. If we could get it right, it might stop Middle East wars in the future." I love the challenge of learning about industries I know nothing about. At school, I had no interest in chemistry. Now I wanted to learn everything there was to know about ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, isobutanol, methane and carbon, the best products to make fuels from sugar, corn, switchgrass, willow trees and waste product, about wind power and solar power, and about hydrogen and geothermals. By the end of a 3-month crash course of asking questions, I felt I was equipped to start fulfilling my $3 bill and pledge by ramping up Virgin Fuels as a global force. But the best way of learning was to get on and do it, to try to turn Necker and Mosquito into the first 100% carbon-neutral islands, to build our first corn and sugar ethanol plants, to try to develop clean isobutanol for planes, and so on. I wanted to do for renewable energy what private capital did for mobile phones 2 decades ago, by turning a small idea into a universal phenomenon. Towards the end of 2006, I invited Tim Flannery to Necker to speak to all managing directors of Virgin worldwide on the environment. Tim is a brilliant Australian scientist and explorer, whose groundbreaking book, The Weather Makers, had started me thinking about the climate in the first place. I think what Tim will do for us is to help give us the scientific background to the path we've now embarked on, and give our people a much better understanding of why we are on it. It is not just about having green credentials. I have made a firm commitment that this is going to be an industrial strategy for Virgin in the 21st century. I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of criticism. I can hear people saying, if CO2 emissions are the problem, why doesn't Richard Branson just stop his planes from flying? But people want to fly, and if we stopped, we'd leave a gap that somebody who might have no sense of responsibility at all would fill. We want to be the people who fly, but in a responsible way. Towards this, by the end of the year, we were aiming to save fuel when planes took off. If they were towed to and from the end of the runway, while waiting to take off, they wouldn't need to stand around so long with their engines spewing out CO2. We started the ball rolling by experimenting at Gatwick and Heathrow. If every airline did the same, we estimated that it would save up to 3 tons of aviation fuel per flight, and together with other efforts, airlines could cut aviation carbon emissions by about 25% worldwide. A case in point was the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer. It wasn't made of metal. Instead, it was built of a carbon composite, which is very light but capable of operating safely at very high altitudes to improve fuel efficiency dramatically. I had been there just a year earlier in Salina, Kansas, and saw it off on its dazzling flight. I chased it to the freezing wastes of Canada, and I was back in Kansas when it landed, 67 hours later. I was excited when I saw for myself how it could circle like some glorious eagle, far above the world at 49,000 feet, and use less fuel per hour than a 4-wheel drive vehicle. This stunning achievement led us to starting up Virgin Galactic and investing in space, the final frontier. Without space, and the work of organizations such as NASA, we would not even know or understand the realities of climate change or feed the current population of the world. Satellites beam back information from space that allows farmers to look at long-range weather forecasts and plan their planting and harvesting to the best advantage. Space also provides the answer to necessary future travel without atmospheric impact. However, sadly, the technology is still in the dirty, polluting, and carbon-intensive Cold War era, and there has been no private investment in viable space launch systems using renewable fuels. We aim to change that as well. Using the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer as a model, Virgin Galactic's fleet was green from the word go. In addition to the spaceship's construction from carbon composite materials, the launch system prototype relies on a fuel derived from laughing gas and rubber. And because of the unique piggyback launch system, we can do thousands of flights for every one of NASA's. One of the big corporate events of recent years has been Virgin Galactic getting going. We had the concept, of course, developed by Burt Rutan, as a very benign space launch system. But the first exciting thing was the realization that this could be a new space launch system to take payload and scientists into space. The second was that I could also clearly see a vision of the future and answer many people's questions. Why does space really matter? And why have you got involved in it? Many people seem to think that Virgin Galactic was some kind of challenge, a personal plaything, albeit an enormously expensive one. The truth is that space is the future of mankind. Everybody, from Dr. Tim Hansen at NASA's Goddard Institute, who is one of the fathers of space science, right the way through to Professor Stephen Hawking, the father of modern physics, agrees that better access to space and the utilization of space is going to be crucial to the reorientation of the world's industries in coping with climate change. For a start, we wouldn't even know about climate change if it hadn't been for the work that was done from space on proving that the climate is changing. Ground-based science is unable to prove climate change in the way that satellites have done. Secondly, very few people realize that we couldn't feed the current population of the world without observations about the climate and weather forecasts, which can only be done from space. The weather and agricultural satellites, and the global positioning system in space, give farmers a heads up on the weather patterns, and allow an extra 15% productivity to actually reach people's mouths. Crate loads of food don't spoil at the docks anymore. Farmers can choose to mill their corn a day earlier, farm it a day earlier, plant it a day later. The first thing many farmers in the American Corn Belt, or the plains of India, or the middle of China, do every morning is to go on the internet and check out what the long-range agricultural satellites are saying they should be doing that day or that week. Access to space has allowed us to increase food production over the past 15 years by about 10%, which has just about coped with the population growth. One of the most crucial things we are going to have to face as a civilization is population growth. It is the key to our survival on the planet. We can't find the solution scientifically and technologically unless there's a willpower to find it. The real problem is that the environmental lobby hasn't really grasped the fact there are 6.5 billion people on the planet. Tim Flannery sees the Earth as a spaceship circling through space. This is what he has to say on the subject of spaceship Earth's population in The Weathermakers. In 1961 there was still room to maneuver. In that seemingly distant age there were just 3 billion people, and they were using only half of the total resources our global ecosystem could sustainably provide. A short 25 years later, in 1986, we had reached a watershed. For that year our population topped 5 billion, and such was our collective thirst for resources that we were using all of Earth's sustainable production. In effect, 1986 marks the year that humans reached Earth's carrying capacity, and ever since we have been running the environmental equivalent of a deficit budget, which is only sustained by plundering our capital base. The plundering takes the form of overexploiting fisheries, overgrazing pasture until it becomes desert, destroying forests and polluting our oceans and atmosphere, which in turn leads to the large number of environmental issues we face. In the end, though, the environment budget is the only one that really counts. By 2001, humanity's deficit has ballooned to 20%, and our population to over 6 billion. By 2050, when the population is expected to level out at around 9 billion, the burden of human existence will be such that we will be using, if they can still be found, nearly 2 planets' worth of resources. But for all the difficulty we'll experience in finding those resources, it's our waste, particularly the greenhouse gases, that is the limiting factor. Over the next century, as we go into a population of 9 billion, we've got to be mindful of space. During 2006, as I traveled to the crowded big cities of the world, to China, India, Africa, the US, I looked and saw and pondered. I am someone who believes in humanity and in the value of each single human life. I can't bear human misery and will do all I can to eradicate poverty, disease, suffering. Yet a population of 9 billion is simply unsustainable. The sheer weight of numbers and overuse of resources will end up killing us. I didn't know where the answer lay, or what the way forwards was. I knew that there was an urgency to stop climate change as fast as possible for us to just win some breathing space before we could even start to think of population numbers. Our plans for Virgin Galactic were soaring ahead at a great speed. We had broken ground on a space station of the future in New Mexico. It was like science fiction. Futuristic designer Philip Stark came up with a dramatic eye logo, a bright blue iris with black pupil. And this has been inlaid on top of a flat disk that covers an enormous underground silo. The disk slides back silently in a very Star Trek way to reveal the launching pad below. But some things that should have flown smoothly ground to a depressing halt, thanks to archaic laws and human resentment. Back in 2004, when we first discussed launching Virgin USA in the US as a low-cost alternative airline to the existing domestic carriers flying long-haul between the East and West coasts, and ordered Airbus planes to show our intent, we expected some opposition in the way of healthy competition. What we didn't expect was to be sandbagged by an old xenophobic law. In the early days of flying, America was worried about foreign planes flying in American skies, and, in order to prevent that, in 1926, they passed the Air Commerce Act, which requires that all domestic airlines remained under the control of U.S. citizens. This was boosted by the Civil Aeronautics Act of 1938, that says that no more than 25% of the voting shares of any airline company based in the U.S. shall be in foreign hands. This meant that 75% had to be under the actual control of U.S. citizens, and we were told by the U.S. Department of Transportation that we had to restructure. We tried to comply, but I had no idea that endless problems would be put in our way. 2 years dragged by with legal argument, and eventually, in 2006, I asked Fred Reed, former president of Delta, to run the new carrier, which would be under the control of a U.S. company, VI Partners, which would own 75% of the capital stock and would appoint 2/3 of the voting members of the board of directors. We separated Virgin America from Virgin Atlantic and all our other airline companies, including Virgin Galactic or any company that shared the Virgin brand name. In addition to ordering new planes, We budgeted about $200 million for startup marketing in the U.S. We moved our base of operations from New York to San Francisco, and I thought we were finally on track to fly. However, I had agreed to be the very visible face of the airline. I was ready to get out there and promote it, as I have always done with all Virgin companies. Perhaps I was too visible. We received massive opposition from labor unions and all major airlines in America. Continental Airlines, American, United, the lot. Our DOT certificate was withheld for months, thanks to this protectionist opposition, while we did everything feasible to comply with every new hurdle every step of the way. Even though Virgin America would be run by a board that was largely made up of U.S. citizens, the opposition claimed that it was a ploy and I would still be in charge. As 2005 dragged on into 2006, we were told that Virgin America's responses to inquiry were not sufficient to prove that the airline is a U.S. citizen. Our opponents urged the DOT to require us to produce additional documentation. Whatever we did, however, it seemed it wasn't enough. Again, we proposed that the airline be restructured, with the voting shares held by a trust approved by the DOT, and with only 2 Virgin Group directors on the 8-person board. In addition to removing the Virgin Group's veto and consent rights, Virgin America said that it would remove me from the board, and possibly even drop the Virgin brand entirely. Then the new board said they would be prepared to remove CEO Fred Reed, should the DOT find that necessary. By that point, I had stepped back, although I was kept informed as a shareholder. I was very gratified that there was also a groundswell of populist support for Virgin America. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Gavin Newsom, the mayor of San Francisco, and Hillary Clinton all said the new airline would create 1,000 new jobs in its first year of service. Even the San Francisco Giants came out in support. The biggest surprise, though, was the 50,000 letters sent in our support to Congress and DOT. As many as 25,000 Americans signed a petition in our favor, and there was a website where people could check on news. There were t-shirts and mugs on sale with the slogan "Let VA Fly." I think people realized that Virgin America would keep prices down and improve the quality of flying. In fact, a study by the Campbell Hill Group showed that if Virgin America had been allowed to fly in 2006, it would have saved U.S. consumers more than $786 million, or an average of $88 per round trip for that year alone. It would also have led to discounting in most, if not all, new markets. This was the opposition's problem. As Fred said, in the old school of airlines were everybody's nightmare. They want to kill a powerful new airline in its infancy. Maybe they need to pay attention to what their customers are saying about their level of service. All our efforts seemed in vain. By the end of 2006, Virgin America was still grounded. Rumors were circulating that we would only be allowed in the air if the U.S. got open skies access to Heathrow and other European airports, even though the two issues were totally unrelated. At the end of September 2006, I was in South Africa again, when Brad Pitt and I met with Nelson Mandela to help lend our support to a new landmines initiative with the appropriate name of the Soul of Africa motto. It's time to put your foot down. The other patrons included Mandela's wife Graca Machel, Queen Noor of Jordan, and John Paul DeJoria of John Paul Mitchell Systems. The Soul of Africa was working with the Mineseeker Foundation to get rid of the 100 million landmines that are buried in the earth and kill or maim someone every 20 minutes. 250,000 square miles of land in the world is useless, much of it in Africa, particularly in Mozambique. Graca was born into a farming family in that lush and beautiful country, so she was eager to be involved with the project. We would be starting in Mozambique to clear the land and return it to agriculture. As soon as the land was cleared, soil cooperatives would train local villagers to plant and harvest crops, which in turn would feed them and allow them to make a living by selling their surplus. The British Ministry of Defense had created wonderful new radar technology that used airships, built by a Virgin company, the Lightship Group, to locate landmines. Before, only 40 square meters of land a day could be cleared, but the brilliant airship technology allowed 100 meters of land to be scanned per second. What would have taken 500 years would now take a decade or less. When Mozambique was returned to its farmers, then we would move on country by country. Graca is also an advocate for children, and she and Mandela discussed with us the issue of the huge numbers of AIDS orphans in Africa. Again, the figures were hard to comprehend. Brad was shocked when Mandela turned to him and said, "There are 1 million children whose parents have died from AIDS. More than 1,000 a day are orphaned in South Africa alone. 6, 7, and 8-year-olds are now the sole breadwinners for their family." The sheer quantity could seem overwhelming, but there is a story, which I find appealing. It goes like this. A young girl is walking along a beach where the sea has washed up hundreds of starfish which are dying on the shore. As she walks, she stoops and picks up the starfish and throws them back into the sea. An old man is passing and says to her, "Why are you doing this? It's not going to make a difference, because there are hundreds there." She looks back at him and says, "If I can make a difference in one of their lives, then it's worth it." This story is the parable that founded Starfish, a small organization that opens and runs AIDS community day care centers in South Africa. Virgin Unite has been working at a grassroots level and finding ways within the community to take care of these orphans. Africa is full of incredible, strong women who seem to hold things together in a very Earth Mother kind of way. Nora is one. I can remember the first time I met her in a small village some 45 minutes outside Johannesburg. There in a dirt clearing was a small tin shack, and in it Nora, an elderly woman, was cooking food for the 200 orphans who lived with her during the day. Somehow, she achieved enough to feed them all by going out and finding the food, then cooking it on a tiny little stove. We were just standing there looking, and all I could see was this sea of 200 heads, tiny people and their eyes, so huge and hungry faces. They have no one, and are petrified to be picked up and hugged. Just one woman. There's no way she can take care of 200 children, yet she does. It was scary. One way we can help is to invest in these women, who have seen the need and set up as surrogate mums and house mothers. It's a huge issue, and no one has really contemplated the results of what's going to happen to children who grow up without the individual love and attention needed by a child who is developing emotionally. I looked around at so many children, playing or tucking into a simple meal, and I could see at once that there simply wasn't enough room for them to sleep in the tiny shack. I asked, "Where do all these children sleep, Nora?" She laughed. "Oh, they're like roosting birds. They scatter in every direction at night and find somewhere safe to sleep. In the morning, they come back like starlings to eat breakfast, and somehow I always manage to find something for them." I felt humbled and emotional, but I also felt angry. If their mothers had been given antiretroviral drugs, they would have been there to bring up their children, instead of being used to line the pockets of the undertakers. Starfish was already helping Nora, but we gave them some money to help with expenses. Working with volunteers from Virgin Unite, we expanded Nora's shack and built an extension on the side to let children sleep there. And then we provided her with a very big stove and promised her a constant supply of cooking fuel. We can't give all of Nora's children a family of their own, but we can help Nora and women like her. Sadly, the African continent is one of the few places in the world where the HIV prevalence rate continues to rise. By 2010, it is estimated that approximately 3 million children will be orphaned in South Africa alone. We support 2 community daycare centers now. In October, we supported 5 more with the Lumba Trust. Sherry Blair came on that trip with us and launched them. If you think of the UK and US, we have so many resources. It's very frustrating, and we all need to do everything we can to stop this ridiculous situation from continuing. I certainly have let this passion boil over a few times, including at the formal dinner given by the Lumba Trust. People should not be dying from preventable and treatable diseases, no matter where they live in the world. The death from AIDS of one of our waiters at Ulisaba some years ago brought this home to me. HIV/AIDS was treatable in the West, and the death rate had dropped dramatically. This, as I had already seen, was far from the case in Africa. To have someone in our midst die in this way was a shock. Despite his sickness, Donald McCubally had remained positive, composing poetry, music, and songs. He'd written some beautiful words, which I read after his death, feeling choked that such a talented young man had been lost to us. The following writings were composed by our friend, poet, and musician, Donald McCubally. He passed on as a result of an AIDS-related illness. His music and his thoughts, along with these beautiful words, shall live on and enlighten others. He had hoped to reach people while he was alive and well, living with HIV, but the universe deemed he would speak from beyond. Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. A short history about Donald's sickness. The day September 14, 2003 was my second day of my employment at Ulisaba Private Game Reserve. It was summer, but in the middle of the night I started to feel cold. It felt like it was winter. I was bound to go knock on David's room. David stayed next door, so I asked him for a heater, because I could no longer stand the cold. The following morning David gave me some money to go to the doctor for a consultation. The doctor did not tell me what was killing me. He suspected malaria. It was not malaria. I came back to Ulisaba with a doctor's note. I was not able to work until the days that were given to me to be off sick came to an end. I returned back to work, but since then my life was shacking. Every time I had to be absent from work, because I was not feeling well. I've tried Sangoma's private doctors, but all that was unviewed or fruitless. Then it happened one day after I went on annual leave. I started to realize that my stomach was so big and very painful. Then I went to the private doctor, Dr. V. Hlatswayo at Hazyview. He helped me a lot, because he encouraged me to go to the Mataquane Hospital. Admit and humble yourselves in order to get help. The doctor and I agreed that I would go to the hospital. When I arrived there I was bound to be admitted, because I was in a bad condition. They took me to have an X-ray, but the end result of that was that they did not find anything. They also did a blood test, and still nothing, until they drained some of the water from my stomach. My stomach was full of water. They sent some to the laboratory, so I was just waiting for the results. The result was that I have TB pleura. After the results I started to take TB tablets they gave me, and, I must be honest with you, these tablets helped me a lot. I did manage to gain my body weight again. I gained my appetite, but my condition started to get worse after I stopped the rifampin. I took 5 tablets daily and changed to 2 tablets, but it started again. I felt dizzy, losing my energy, and I was sweating a lot. When I went back for a checkup, I told them how I was feeling, but they just didn't take me into consideration. They were just doing their own things. I took the TB treatments for almost 9 months, until I went back for another checkup for the last time, and then I asked them to do an HIV test. My people are dying because of the lack of knowledge. They conducted the test, and after the results, they told me that I am HIV positive, but they cannot give me any treatment because they are still waiting for my CD4 count results. Only then they can see what to do. They also said that they couldn't treat me if my CD4 cells are above 200. They will only give me treatment if it's below 200. My point of view. As far as I am concerned about this, the government are supporting HIV/AIDS to do their job of destroying the nation. They told me that my CD4 count is above 200, which means that my system is still strong, and that's why they cannot help me. So I thought that is totally wrong. Why wait until my CD4 cells go down before they'll help me? Why can't they make sure that the virus does not cross the boundary to go from HIV to AIDS? Blessed are the people who are eager to help, because God will give them wisdom. Because of everything that I have experienced during my sickness, and until now, I know what is killing me. I feel like I can rise and shine, so that people can know the truth, and the truth can set everyone free. It took me time to decide whether I should do the test or not, because I was scared that if they told me that I'm positive, I'd start to worry, and people will laugh at me. But I must tell you that now I know my status, I've accepted it. I forgave myself and asked God for forgiveness, and I have put everything behind me as I'm coming from X to next. I'm very bold and strong to live with it, and I'll never die as a coward, but as a hero. By the way, I'm a songwriter who writes about HIV and AIDS, so I had to know my status so that I can practice what I preach. I just want to be an example, especially in our area, as it is a rural area, and the people are still scared to expose themselves. The virus will spread all over if we hide it from others. Let us work together as one, to be proud of ourselves, and have the same purpose in order to defeat our enemy. This is not a disease, but it is a war that is in Africa, aiming to destroy our continent. I'm pleading to everyone who can read this message to consider it, and come out with something to help the nation. I'm Donald, the affected one. As a man who is living with HIV, I'm always thinking about positive things in such a way that there is nothing painful happening to me anymore, and I don't have a room of disappointment in my heart, as I've had worse disappointments in my life before. No more for the second time. I'm proud of myself, I love myself, and I'll always look after myself for better health, and I live for the lives and future of others. I'm now fully aware that I'm responsible for my family and myself and hope to be well again. I really didn't believe that you can live with HIV and AIDS for a long time, but I believe that I have lived life with it for a period that I did not know about my condition. Now that I know, I promise you that it will be cured, and it will leave me like a free man, like a man who has been freed from jail or from chains. I'm telling you that I'll rise again. God said that He would give power to the weak, so that they can fly like an eagle. If this can work for me again, I know that it can work for you, my friend. Don't even be scared to go and do the test, because it is helpful, especially if you are unsure of your life status. This is a good time to go ahead and be brave enough to fight the sickness. And listen, united we will stand, but divided we fall, so let us work together in order to become victorious at the end of the day. The actual cause of Donald's death was AIDS-induced TB, but malaria is also a major killer. After Donald died, I swore that no other Virgin employee would die unnecessarily. As a result of Donald's moving words, and finding out more myself, I decided that it was wrong that any company anywhere in the world should lose any of its staff from AIDS, and that every company in the world should pledge that they would encourage their staff to be voluntarily tested and make sure they get antiretrovirals in time to avoid HIV ever becoming AIDS. The first thing was to try to get our own house in order. So my wife Joan and I started the process by pulling in all the people who worked for us together in the bush. We then took an HIV test in front of everybody, and we tried to get as many people as possible to take it. Most of them did. And we also asked young people who had HIV to come and explain how antiretroviral drugs had saved their lives, as an example to everyone of how the program worked. We made 2 films particularly for Africans explaining in simple and straightforward terms how the body works, how antiretroviral drugs work, how the immune system works, what happens when the CD4 level drops below 200, why people are dying, how they can avoid dying, and that condoms save lives. In a test in one of our businesses in South Africa, nearly 24% were HIV positive. I'm afraid that it's about average, which basically means that 24% of our staff would die within 6 to 7 years if they did not have access to antiretrovirals. We made it clear that we would supply anybody who had a CD4 count that dropped below 300 with antiretroviral drugs free of charge. We also rolled out the 0% challenge across all our businesses worldwide, focusing on ensuring that no virgin staff members would ever die from AIDS, that 0% would become HIV positive, and that 0% of HIV-positive pregnant mothers would pass on HIV to their baby. This also includes 0% tolerance of any discrimination against HIV-positive people within our businesses. Donald said, "This is not a disease, but it is a war that is in Africa, aiming to destroy our continent. Let us work together as one, to be proud of ourselves and have some purpose in order to defeat our enemy." In memory of Donald, I've decided to set up a war room to help coordinate and unite all the organizations in Africa who are trying to defeat African diseases. The war room will map out the problems, seek out best practices, and move and maximize resources. It will get on with the job rather than arguing and debating. It will alert the world to new diseases like AIDS before they get out of control. It will fight HIV, malaria, TB, and fistula. It will mobilize experts, movers and shakers to get out to particular areas fast by pulling in contacts, governments, and founders. Its ultimate aim is to make sure there are no more Donalds, and that, through his death, thousands of others live. After Donald died, I happened to visit the local hospital with my mom, and, by chance, came across a delightful man called Dyke, who used to be a game driver for Elisaba. He was lying in a bed without hope, basically just a skeleton with no body fat left on him whatsoever. When he saw my mum, there was a glimpse of recognition and happiness in his eyes. We instantly put him on antiretroviral drugs. His improvement was immediate. He completely recovered. Thanks to getting proper medicine and treatments, he went from literally death's door to leading a normal life again. Everyone who has AIDS should have this opportunity of being reborn. Very sadly, Dyke has recently died from a bout of malaria that he contracted on a trip to Mozambique, which has made me even more determined not to let a small insect continue to wipe out thousands of people in Africa every single day. I did some research with Virginity and a wonderful man from Anglo-American called Dr. Brian Brink into finding a blueprint of hope, and amongst treeless, rocky hills, and the dismal poverty of the dusty rural townships of Alansdoorn in Limpopo province, we came across the Ndlova Medical Center. It is run by Dr. Hugo Tempelman, an earnest Dutch physician, who has dedicated the past 15 years to treating HIV/AIDS, as well as the other big diseases that kill Africans, TB and malaria. One of the first things I noticed when I was shown around was the cluster of small development projects outside Ndlova Hospital, including a bakery, a repair shop, nappy manufacturing, preschools, computer school, car washes, a gym, all offering employment to locals. Hugo saw I was impressed. Yes, we're all about hope, and we want people to know that they will get well. They also need to make a living to keep themselves and their families while they are being treated. Dr. Brink had fought a stubborn battle over many years to get antiretroviral drugs prescribed free of charge to any of Anglo's tens of thousands of workers who needed them. He finally won by pointing out that the loss in trained staff costs more economically than the costs of the drugs themselves. Once he won that battle, he then said, "Now, what about the miners' families who have HIV and AIDS?" I admired his forthright attitude, and with Hugo and Virgin Unite, we discussed what it would take to build a hospital to serve the Sabi Sands district around Ulisaba. My first venture in helping to control the spread of HIV was in the early 1990s when I launched a charity, Mates Condoms. It was a big step from free Mates Condoms to joining with Anglo American to create a one-stop healthcare center. We decided that the new hospital would be named the Babizi Community Health Center, after the Zulu word for lion. It would serve 100,000 people. Treatment for HIV, TB, and malaria would be free, but other medical services would have a modest charge that will help ensure that the clinic becomes sustainable over time. The 100,000 people around Ulisaba would be protected. However, for those who live far from the hospital, the treatment needs to get to them. It is difficult to reach that last mile in remote areas with health services. So we kicked off a campaign called Heaven's Angels across the whole Virgin Group to raise money to buy and maintain motorbikes. The businesses, especially Virgin Trains and Virgin Atlantic, have done a wonderful job raising over $1 million to put over 100 bikes on the road. The working model we are building is that someone from a village buys the bike through a loan. In return, they are trained and paid to deliver healthcare on the motorbike 3 days a week, and the rest of the week, they can use the bike for their own entrepreneurial activity. In this way, it becomes sustainable and creates jobs for people within the communities. In 2007, we began to test this model with a great partner called SHEF, who have already built over 64 sustainable clinics and pharmacies across Kenya, all owned by local people. We'd like to scale that up to help with healthcare delivery across Africa, with not hundreds, but thousands of biking medical outreach workers, and by showing the people themselves how they can earn a living, help each other and go that last mile. On the one hand, I was working hard through Virgin Unite to try to help the developing world with some of the problems they face. And on the other hand, I was working hard at taking our space launch program forward. It was a strange but fascinating dichotomy. Virgin Galactic had caused a great stir, and people had already signed up for our first flights. Then something remarkable happened in my personal journey to space. I was on Necker in November with Bert Rutten, the designer of the spaceship, and a group of our founding customers, who had come out to find details of the project directly from Bert's own mouth. Will called from London to say he had just listened to Professor Stephen Hawking on the Today program on Radio 4. Will said, "Stephen Hawking has just done an amazing interview about why man needs to be in space, and why he still wants to go, and why if possible he'd like Richard Branson to take him there." I gathered all of our founding customers and Bert around a set of speakers, and we linked up to the internet and played Stephen Hawking's podcast from the BBC site to them. The human race must move to a planet beyond our solar system to protect the future of the species. Life could be wiped out by a nuclear disaster or an asteroid hitting the planet. Once we spread out into space and establish colonies, our future should be safe. There are no similar planets to Earth in our solar system, so humans will have to go to another star. Current chemical and nuclear rockets are not adequate for taking colonists into space, as they would mean a journey of 50,000 years. I discount using warp drive to travel at the speed of light for taking people to a new outpost. Instead, I favor matter-antimatter annihilation as a means of propulsion. When matter and antimatter meet up, they disappear in a burst of radiation. If this was beamed out of the back of a spaceship, it could drive it forward. Traveling at just below the speed of light, it would mean a journey of about 6 years to reach a new star. It would take a lot of energy to accelerate to near the speed of light. My next goal is to go into space. Maybe Richard Branson will help me. There was a ripple of excitement amongst our budding astronauts. We all felt privileged to be part of a project he felt so enthusiastic about. I never ceased to be amazed by Professor Hawking, a man I admire greatly. I have met him a couple of times over the years, so I picked up the phone and called him. I explained that we had not given away any free tickets on Virgin Galactic to anyone, despite the large number of celebrities approaching us. But if Stephen really felt up to it, and was medically shown to be fit to fly, it would be a privilege to carry him into space. Using his computerized voice, he explained that mankind simply had to get into space if we were going to maintain life on Earth. There is a threat to life on Earth posed by humans. The two main causes of concern are global warming and the genetic alteration of vaccines and other microorganisms. Because we now have enough knowledge of the things that could happen to this planet to know that we need to use the resources of the rest of the solar system if we're going to survive as a civilization. And we need also to have the incentive to go out and explore. And it can't only be about robots going into space, although that is part of the answer. People have to be able to go there. He added, Virgin Galactic is a step towards taking access to space out of the hands of the chosen few. At my request, Stephen Attenborough, head of astronaut relations, went to see Dr. Hawking with our chief medical officer to discuss the logistics of arranging a simulation gravity flight for him as soon as possible. Continuing on from Dr. Hawking's interest in our project, we looked into many other aspects of why space matters. There is the short-term reason of understanding climate change and providing us with the communications and information to keep the planet producing food it needs for its burgeoning population. But, as he said, in the long term we also need to be in space to provide the future sources of energy for the planet and possibly even some of the solutions to climate change. For example, many exciting ideas are being developed, such as solar umbrellas. They are not as big as people might think, but small crystalline structures made of transparent film that are scattered in space like bubbles at the Lagrange point, which is halfway between the Sun and the Earth. Here, the umbrellas would reflect back about 5% of the Sun's rays, which in real terms is a lot. People also think that the internet is somehow energy-free, but it emits masses of greenhouse gas. Scientists have been looking into server farms, for example, which are fueled by solar panels and beam back radio signals from space direct to computers, saving a massive 80% in electricity. One of the things I am also very interested in is the possibility of taking a Virgin Fuels research team to the moon, then building a fleet of spaceships so we can work there. This might sound like science fiction, but at the start of the decade I had no idea that I would be running a spaceship fleet, and would be taking a suborbital flight into space with the most brilliant physicist alive today. In keeping with Stephen Hawking's opinion that our future could lie in space, I have been looking at a space-age fuel, helium-3. It is an incredibly rare form of helium on the surface of the Earth, and freely available at the Earth's core, far beyond our present capabilities to tap. But there is a rich abundance of it in moon dust. When I considered that just a single spaceship load from the moon would power the US for a year, it did make me pause and do more research into the possibilities. Helium-3 is made under extreme pressure and extreme heat. It was made when the moon ripped out of the Earth and flew into orbit around it, and continues to be made by solar winds down countless millions of years. Scientists can make only minuscule amounts, at a cost of billions of dollars, in the accelerator at CERN. Getting it from the moon, where it would be mined from the dust, and then heated to release the gas itself, would not be wildly expensive, nor beyond our ability. Helium-3 could supply all of the Earth's energy needs way into the future by using fusion, which is both clean and safe. It would allow the land being earmarked to grow biofuels to be given over to growing food. As far-fetched as it might sound, helium-3 could one day save humanity. In February 2003, when it had looked inevitable that the US and UK were going to invade Iraq, I decided that I could not just stand by and watch. I had to do something to try to stop it. Sadly, before I could, America began bombing Iraq. But it got me thinking, maybe we should gather together a group of global elders, in the hope that their voices and wisdom and negotiating power could avoid such conflicts in the future. At the same time, at his home near Bath, my good friend Peter Gabriel had a wonderful vision that technology was propelling people into one large global village. Yet there was no one there to lead this village and use technology as a powerful force for good. Many of today's leaders are not there to do the right thing for humanity, but instead most of them have some other type of agenda linked to political, military, economic, or religious power. Our ideas converged on a poignant trip to South Africa in November 2003, when we were helping Mandela launch his 46,664 campaign. Since then we have been on a deeply satisfying journey, with the help of some amazing individuals, to build a dream of pulling together a group of global elders. We believe that men and women who have shown moral integrity and leadership have a great deal of wisdom to offer. It is the kind of wisdom that has always been historically passed down by tribal or village elders. Ancient intuitive wisdom is what our frantic high-tech global village needs. When Mandela and his wife Graca Machel agreed to be the founding elders, and Archbishop Tutu agreed to chair the group, we knew that we had the core of something very special. In July 2006 on Necker, we held a gathering of some of the top leaders in the fields of technology, philanthropy, business, science, the arts, and many other areas, all of whom had come together to debate the elders' concept and to take it forward to the next stage. Peter and I opened the first day by explaining where the idea for the elders had originated. Peter said, "I see it based on African tribes, who look up to the elders in their village. But now we're way beyond the little village. Now there's Google and Wikipedia, and all the other links to connect people." I nodded. There have been individual elders operating alone for a long time. Good men and women who speak out. The idea is if the most respected people in the world work together as a group, they will be more effective. Instead of the power of one, we'll have the power of 12. It was 2 weeks filled with incredible ideas and debates, but most of all the overwhelming confirmation that the world needs a group like this. It was the most fantastic experience to be in the presence of some wonderful individuals like Archbishop Tutu and President Carter. Both of them added such deep insights into the elders concept, and Tutu of course added a playful sense of humor. I will never forget some of the magical moments, like Peter playing baiko on the grand piano in the living room of the great house with Tutu and his beautiful wife Leah dancing. Or when Peter, in a long white flowing shirt, was teaching Tutu how to swim in the ocean. He seemed to enjoy it because he spent some time with Peter and me practicing in the pool. I've got a pool at home I don't use. My wife and children do, so perhaps now I can join them, he said, smiling broadly. We also had the pleasure of having some amazing grassroots elders join us to give their views on how the global elders could make a difference. Zaki Akhmat from the Treatment Action Group inspired us all with his passion to ensure that everyone who is HIV positive has access to antiretroviral drugs. He has truly given up his whole life to fight for the lives of others, refusing to take treatment himself until everyone can get the drugs. Hopefully the global elders can play a role in amplifying the voices of people like Zaki and Taddy Bletcher, individuals doing impactful work who need their stories heard around the world to help them scale up their efforts. Everyone spoke freely and frankly, putting forward strong and sensible opinions and points of view. Jean L. Wang led off one session by commenting about Mandela. This is an amazing time in history. Mandela has true moral courage. He'll say the same thing behind closed doors and out in public. He's focused on what's best for humanity, and he's demonstrated leadership, not just through a course of action, but through compassion. She handed over to Archbishop Tutu. He got up with difficulty from a low seat and joked, "That happens when you are at this age. You have to have a discussion with your body and say, 'Body, we're about to get up now, how about it?'" I gave him a shoulder rub, but joking aside, all of the things Tutu said were moving. I'm glad I'm not God. God must be weeping. God is omnipotent but seems weak. We wonder why he doesn't zap people who do wrong. But there are people who rise up and do good things. They overthrow apartheid. Sometimes, like sun shining through the rain, God looks and smiles. He's smiling today on this island. I firmly believe this is a moral universe. Despite all appearances to the contrary, where it often seems so clear that evil is on the rampage. But in the ultimate end, good prevails. Compassion, caring, are what will ultimately have the last word. One important issue we discussed was what difference the elders could make without replicating the role of the United Nations or the important work of the World Health Organization. I started the ball rolling by saying, we have all discussed the idea that the elders would cover areas that the UN and nation-states are not covering. Obviously, Jimmy Carter had personal experience not only of working through the UN, but also working through his own foundation, the Carter Center. He said that one of the problems that beset the UN was the veto, and that there was a lot of horse trading behind the scenes to get some resolutions through. You can't get past the veto in the UN. It would be feasible for the elders to bypass this. There isn't anywhere now people can go for conflict resolution. To further the peace process. To provide experts on how do you negotiate peace. There are organizations, Harvard, the Carter Center, but you can't go to the UN because you know the US will veto one side, Russia, China the other. So the elders as a peace foundation or whatever, so that people will say as a first response, why don't I go to the elders to help prevent this war? If we had a perfect UN, we wouldn't need it. But the UN isn't dealing with peace or the alleviation of suffering or human rights violations, the oppression of women. You can't get them to debate the oppression of women because many Muslim countries are against that. Christians too. This is the kind of thing elders could address without constraint, and the hell with the fact that it isn't being done. I bet that Kofi Annan would be saying amen on all this. The Carter Center worked to set up a High Commission on Human Rights, which the UN didn't want. We are talking about an organization that could supersede the UN and avoid the inherent constraints of a 200-member organization. It was heavy stuff. We had a consensus during that session that the elders should seek to reinforce women's rights, and to do it from a position of being above politics. With no authority, Jimmy said. That's important. Only moral authority. Where the work of the World Health Organization was concerned, it was thought that the elders would need a broad agenda to look at controversial issues, such as HIV/AIDS, helping to ensure clean drinking water for all. 80% of the developing world does not have access to clean drinking water, and disease. While the elders would support eradicating malaria, for example, only who would have the authority to use the term eradicate. Jimmy said, the elders could try to promote the quality of life in the poverty-stricken world. If they don't want to create something, they can help with the structure of something. Alleviating suffering through disease eradication is part of that. Every day was like that, filled with solid debate and discussion, each time moving the concept and our dreams forward a little. We all understood exactly where he was coming from when Peter said, "The world is a living mirror. Astronauts say from space you see the Earth as something you can hold in your hand, a little blue ball. Light bounces off it. Everything is reflected." My 4-year-old son was telling me a story. He said when people get touched, they light up. When they don't, they go into the shadows. So we should try to get everyone touched. They're not numbers and statistics, but real people. Ideas seem to stimulate ideas. It was as if we'd had these hopes buried inside, just waiting to burst out. Even just before Jimmy Carter left, he turned back with some last-minute thoughts. Elders can be the conscience of the world. They can be a guide to the world, an entity that is recognized for putting forth ideals of peace and justice. Being here has been delightful. It has been an inspirational, exciting, unpredictable and gratifying experience. Then with a wave and his characteristic broad smile, he went up the steps, and the helicopter lifted him, and his wife rose up and away. Back at the house I asked Tutu if he would like some tea. "No, I'm not English," he replied with a twinkle. "Oh, you'd like Peter's tea. He has more time to make tea than I do," I joked. A month later we met with Graca and Mandela at their home, for them, to make the selection for the initial group of elders. Grandchildren scurried around us, and Jean and I walked out of this wonderful meeting, feeling that the elders was finally a reality. We went on to Ulisaba, and had a wonderful celebration, signing the invitation letters. It was even more emotional as my father and mother were there to share this special moment with us. The dream that Peter and I had so many years ago was gathering momentum.
Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.